installing your HSU 24, which is this help arm assembly, should already be mounted up on the rear pedestal mount. We have everything loose. Instructions up to this point shows us mounting the 4 bolts here. As I said, they're loose. The loose adjustment on the rear here. There's also a loose adjustment here, as well as we'd kept this Allen bolt loose. Best scenario is to try and keep this as center as you can. That'll be done by adjusting this. Loosening it allows you to pivot. Keep in mind that this is fairly heavy. We're gonna go ahead and mount the washer with bolt that holds the arm to this pedestal here. Should be a very large washer, as well as your bolt. There is no torque spec for this. Just get it snug. Now, one thing I do want to point out, when you do put this arm onto the pedestal, there is a key that lines up with this notch right here. It's actually the locking pawl that locks this arm center. I would suggest that when you lay this down, you could sit it down anywhere along this path, but I would rotate it forward until that locking pawl engages. You want that nice and snug. Next, we're gonna go ahead and mount both arms. This whole assembly is loose, so you're gonna have this pin is loose, as well as the nut down here with these spacers for this plate. Now, something to keep in mind is that this pole here has no stop on it. That's normal. So what would happen is if you were to remove this to install the 2 arms, this whole assembly will want to just fall out. So there's a little bit of a trick that we've done that'll help you. Go on ahead and slip a very large zip tie, one of these large industrial zip ties. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna push it up. Snug up the zip tie, just like that. I'm gonna go ahead and loosen this. And now it stays up. This pin goes through both of your arms. A couple suggestions. So slide these out and snug them up. Here. Same thing goes with this. Just snug. Both rollers do face down. The one with this 2 or double 90 goes on top. This goes just like this. So this is installed as you see it here. The pin here, if you notice, it does rotate. You want to keep something in mind when you do lift this assembly up, that the pin is vertical and you will have to pull it back. So what I do at this point is I go ahead and take your pin, line it up through both assemblies. I'm going to rotate this around, pick this assembly up. Now we have to line this assembly up and thread it in. Okay, I've got a few threads. You notice here, we're still not engaged onto this. What's gonna happen is when we get this tightened all the way up, it's going to be pulled back and slid into one of those notches. So what I'm gonna go ahead and do is I'm gonna continue to tighten this up. Now we're getting pretty close. I'm gonna pull this back, let it lock in. Now I'm gonna go ahead and continue to tighten this. Now you will probably get to a point where you're gonna have to use a wrench. In our case, we've got a just a small pipe wrench we're gonna use. ahead and take the zip tie off so it doesn't bind. We're gonna keep this loose for now. In fact, I'm gonna loosen this a few more hairs. There we go, I want it to be loose. Now once you get it snugged, you just want to snug it a little bit more. Give it a good whack. Pull this pin back. Now, they are mounted. This will give you an adjustment point to lock the upper arm in place. Of course, you can go all the way around if necessary. So, we'll go ahead and allow that to lock to keep it out of the way. We're gonna go ahead and tighten up this rear nut. Same thing, snug, a little bit more. So now at this point, we're gonna go ahead and start the alignment procedure of lining this arm to the table so we know where center is at. We'll go from there. Okay, so at this point we've got the arm mounted. We've tightened the top bolt. We have taken the air line, run it down the side of the main support tube here. With the arm comes a T. You do want to splice it in right after the oiler. On the front of the cylinder here, you've got two controls. This one here lowers and raises the main air cylinder. You also have this trigger on the right-hand side. This actually releases a lock pin located right here. That lock pin locks into this area, that groove on that plate. As you can tell right now, everything's very loose. So the first thing we're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna locate the long extension with the smaller cone. You're gonna wanna install this in the center. We're gonna lower it down, not to the table, but very close. The idea is that we're gonna wanna get this adjusted to the point that this cone is as close to the center of the table as you can get. So there's a couple things to keep in mind. The first adjustment I always do is forward and back, which are these 4 bolts on this main plate where it mounts to this tower. If it is loose, you see here there's a gap on the rear and it's flush on the front. I've already have it pulled all the way forward. If you notice, it's still not quite forward enough. And the reason for that, you have to tighten down these 2 rear bolts before you do the front. These are 18 millimeter, I believe. That is correct, they're 18 millimeter. So I'm gonna just snug it up, and that should bring the cone closer to the center for the forward and back movement. Okay, so now we're gonna go ahead and snug up the front. I would not recommend tightening everything until you know exactly where you want it. Some of the adjustments that I'm gonna do on this video may be slightly out of order from this point forward than what you may run into. So I'm gonna try to explain what each of these adjustments do. So the next adjustment I typically look at is the large bolt on the rear here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go on ahead and bring it in the center. And just snug these up. You've got this adjustment here, and then you've got this that screws into there. So I'm gonna get an idea of where it's at. Obviously from here, it's very far to my left, or from your video to your right. So what I'm gonna go ahead and do is I'm gonna loosen this up. I'm gonna move the arm close to where I'd like it. I would not be concerned if this is either far this way or far that way, or even touching these metal flanges here. The point is, you just want to get that cone to the center with all of these adjustments tight. So the next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and start to snug up both of these, but not tighten them. And I'm going to see what the arm does. What's going to happen is this here is a stop that will pull this steel plate here this way, and it helps keep it from rotating. This one here clamps around the main post that's on here. So these are both somewhat independent of their function, but they will affect how this cone moves. So I want to get an idea. So I'm going to grab myself my Allen key here. You've got two different Allen sizes. You're going to need a 6 and an 8. So the 8 is your clamp bolt, and your 6 is this anti-rotation stud. So if you noticed, I just snugged this up and I moved my cone already to the left. So what I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna loosen that a hair. I'm gonna bring my adjustment on the rear and bring it back to center. This rear bolt is an 18. That's pretty close to center. Go ahead and snug this up a little bit more. Now if you notice, I'm snugging it and it's not moving. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna grab this and move it, give it a little bit of force. You notice there's a little bit of play. Now that play, you look at your top plate here, the top plate is not moving, but this arm is. So that play is existent where the lock pin is up here. There's nothing you can do about that play. What I am gonna do is I'm gonna try and make center of this play to the center of the table. It's definitely off. So I'm gonna try and hold it to the center there. I'm gonna loosen my adjustments back up and move them again. That a hair. I'm going to bring this a little bit farther over. Let's see what happens here. I'm also going to this time start to snug up my clamp bolt. Watch as I tighten up the clamp bolt, the arm is going to move. See that? I still don't quite like where it's at, but it's a whole lot better. So I'm going to loosen up the clamp bolt again, which by the way, this is an 8mm. The clamp bolt, I would recommend you loosen quite a bit. Make sure it has some slack in it. I'm going to loosen this adjustment stud again. And I'm going to bring this rear adjustment even farther over. Go back, snug up my stud, and then tighten up the clamp here. Alright, it's pretty good. I'm going to try and take up a little bit more slack. As I've said before, you may have to adjust things in a little bit different of an order because each of these adjustments affect this arm a little bit differently. back the other way just a hair. This time I'm going to tighten up the nut. Just snug it up. And keep in mind this is a 19 millimeter on the nut size. That is looking a lot better. Let's see here. There we go. So, at that point, go on ahead and take your 18, make sure your plate bolts are nice and tight. There is no torque spec to any of this. Our 19, make sure that this is tight. And we're going to tighten up the nut on our stud here. This is a 19 millimeter. At that point, you have all your adjustments tight, your arm functions in direct center of the table. We go ahead and raise that back up. Take out our cone. I would double check the function of everything on the arm. Make sure everything slides freely, locks correctly. Make sure your pin release works. From there, I have no air leaks. All my nuts are tight. This nut is tight. This one here is tight. Your arm is now successfully installed.